And the Coalition Party were meeting here in Canberra today, rubber-stamped the so-called Big Stick legislation the government has proposed to crack down on, well, any energy company that's found to have engaged in so-called market misconduct. Now, there were a number of Liberals concerned about this, concerned that, well, it wasn't exactly the Liberal way of doing things to have government intervening in the market in this way. They thrashed out those concerns, or at least gave voice to those concerns, at a smaller backbench committee meeting yesterday. So today there really wasn't much of a fuss as this went through. No one was actually going to embarrass a re-elected Prime Minister, not doing what they've been doing in New South Wales today to Gladys Berejiklian on the abortion bill today, all on board for the Big Stick legislation. So what does it actually do? Well, my understanding is the legislation wasn't shown to government MPs today at their party room meeting. This glossy brochure, produced, it would seem, by Treasury, was provided to them. It runs to 7 pages, and gives the bullet points of what the legislation is all about. It would allow not the Treasurer, that was under the original proposition, but the federal court to actually order a power company to divest an asset, a coal-fired power station, a gas plant, etc., if the ACCC finds that they have engaged in market misconduct. Separately, this legislation would also give the Treasurer the power, if recommended again by the ACCC, the power to actually set prices and contracts for an energy company for up to 3 years. And it's actually that part of the bill that's concerning the energy industry the most. Sarah McNamara is the CEO of the Australian Energy Council, which represents Australia's major electricity and gas businesses, and I spoke to her earlier. Sarah McNamara, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks.
So have you even seen the legislation we're talking about here for the so-called Big Stick?
No, we haven't been provided with a copy of the legislation. We do, however, understand it is in largely the same form that it was in when it was presented to the last Parliament before the election.
So no substantial changes on the previous bill?
We understand there may have been some minor changes, but we have not been provided with a copy of the bill.
Have you been consulted?
We did have an opportunity to provide the government with some suggestions for clarifying amendments that would make the bill easier to understand and comply with. Our information is that the majority of those suggestions have not been taken on board, but as I say, we have not had any feedback through that process, so we are a bit in the dark.
Were they of a technical nature, those suggestions, or were they more substantial in terms of the changes you suggested?
Well, perhaps I could characterise them as substantial and technical. I mean, our position is well known. We oppose this bill because it will not do anything to bring down costs for consumers. We do not see the need for a divestiture power in a sector-specific way in this economy, and the ACCC agrees with us on that. And in fact, both the ACCC and Treasury, during the Senate committee inquiry at the start of the year, confirmed that this bill would do nothing to lower costs for consumers. So in principle, we have that concern about the bill. In detail, we have tried to work with Treasury and the energy departments to say, if this bill is going to pass, here are ways that we could make it clearer so we can understand how to comply.
Well, let's just go through some of your concerns here. So, look, under what we understand to be in the legislation, only the federal court could actually order divestiture, that an asset be sold off, based on a finding by the ACCC of so-called market misconduct, and that could include retailers not passing on cost reductions, generators not offering competitive contracts, and corrupt behaviour in the wholesale market. Aren't they things that should be stamped out?
Well, there is no evidence that that sort of misconduct is in existence in the market at the moment. And to
well, then there's nothing to worry about then.
Well, it does increase risk, and that does put upward pressure on costs. And to the extent that there are issues of that nature in the market, they are already covered by the existing provisions of the Competition Act. What this bill does is bring in really heavy-handed penalties which enable the government to reach into retail businesses and direct how pricing occurs, to reach in to contracting that generators complete, and allow the Treasurer to set the terms on which contracts are developed. Well, this gets to the second part of the proposed law here that's perhaps had a little or less attention than the divestiture. The Treasurer would have the power to compel an energy company to supply electricity or contracts at whatever terms and conditions he sees fit for a 3-year period. For up to 3 years. The Treasurer of the day would have that power.
So what would that mean in practice?
It politicises totally the nature of contracting in the generation market. It introduces the threat of interventions by the government, which is very concerning from a would-be investor perspective and very concerning from a market volatility perspective.
But there'd be a few hurdles to clear before you got to that point of the Treasurer doing that.
Well, the Treasurer would need to receive advice from the ACCC, yes, but the Treasurer would have the ability to set the terms of the contract and set the length of the contract, and that's an extraordinary power for a Treasurer to have, because it requires the Treasurer to be in the shoes of an energy trader in the market, and that is not a role that office should undertake.
Is there also an issue here? The Commonwealth Government now owns all of Snowy Hydro, so it is, through that company, a player in the market. Is there a conflict if the government is also then, the Treasurer, holding the power to intervene and set prices in the market?
We certainly see that there are problems with the government intervening in the market with a contracting power. Particularly because of a conflict through its stake, its ownership of Snowy Hydro? Well, that is certainly potentially problematic.
Right. You are worried that it's conflicted here? We are
very concerned about the Treasurer having a contracting power in this market.
Is there firm evidence that this law would scare off investment?
Absolutely. And the Energy Council, we're not the only ones saying that. Jennifer Westacott from the Business Council of Australia has said similar this week, and since the bill first came to light last year. The Energy Users Association has been saying the same thing, and the overwhelming weight of evidence before the Senate inquiry at the start of the year was that this bill would do nothing to lower costs for Australian families and those doing it tough trying to pay their bills, and would actually have the opposite effect.
Can I also just touch on yesterday's news from the ACCC that since the government last year brought in this default price in the market, there has actually been a fall in the very high standing offers that the energy companies offer. However, the cheapest market offers have gone up. Why is that?
Well, markets move around all the time, and it's a bit too early, given the default market offer only came into existence on the 1st of July. It's probably a little bit too early to say definitively what its impact is going to be. But the Energy Market Commission, when it provided advice to COAG's Energy Council at the end of last year on the impact of a default market offer, predicted exactly that. Said it would bring down prices at that top end of the market because the default market offer replaces standing offers, but it might mean that some businesses were not always able to offer as many cheap market deals as they had before. Now, the good news for consumers, though, is that is not an across-the-board situation. There are still very competitive energy market deals out there, and every customer that's on a default market offer would be better off in that competitive end of the market because that's where the cheaper deals are. And we're delighted to say that there are just 11% of customers on default market offers at the moment. It's good that prices have come down for them, but every single one of those customers would have even greater savings if they jumped off the default price and into those competitive market offers.
And finally, Labor's debating what to do on its emissions target, the 45% that it took to the election. Does the industry have a view on what sort of target we should be aiming for?
No, we take the position that it's up to the government of the day to set emissions reduction targets from time to time. What we need is a framework for how to achieve them, and we like to work constructively with governments on...
Do we have that right now?
Well, we are working constructively with the government at the moment on those issues, and that's an ongoing conversation.
So we don't necessarily have a framework right now as far as the industry is concerned?
Well, the National Energy Guarantee last year was a framework of sorts. That is now off the table, and we are looking at what might replace it. We do have part of the National Energy Guarantee in place with the reliability side of things, but on emissions, that's an ongoing conversation.
Well, the government says it's detailed to the last tonne where the emissions reduction will come from. That's good enough.
We do look like we are potentially going to meet targets, but we'll wait to hear from the government on what rules it might put in place.
All right, Sarah McNamara from the Australian Energy Council, thank you.
Thank you.